Something had moved me to visit the coast on the day I took the trip. Something about the humdrum of the daily grind that reminded me to feed my soul, that it had been too long. The heaviness of the previous week, perhaps even the previous year, had been particularly tangible since I'd gotten up that morning. By the time the sun had climbed high over the hazy afternoon cityscape, my neck was tense and my temples felt to be full of pebbles. I knew from experience that I needed to find a way to get my shoulders to drop and my breathing to slow before bedtime, to ensure a full night of relaxing, rejuvenating sleep. So, once the day's loose ends had been tied up or put on the shelf for tomorrow, I took a walk around the block and caught a wonderfully empty town service bus to the beach. As we pulled out of the city and I left all the thoughts of the day behind me, the houses and trees we sailed past gave way to low promenade walls of twinkling local granite, and the urban noises gave way to the crash of waves and the distant calls of the hosts of birds which frequented the area at this time of year. Upon stepping down from the bus, I ambled towards the blue expanse in front of me, feeling the day's heat radiating from the golden silver sand of the velvet strand ahead of me. The velvet strand was so named for its smooth and silky sand, which gave way gently below my feet as I stepped onto it. I breathed in deeply the crisp salt air that had been calling to me all week. The sun's enveloping heat protected my skin from the caress of the breeze, and the soothing swish of the rhythmic waves penetrated my being. Indeed, it seemed to be reaching right into the darkest corners of my soul and swishing out the cobwebs, creating a ripple of relaxation throughout the whole network of my muscles, my joints, and even my bones. I walked for a while towards Baldoyle, meditating, as I often do, on those who were here before, those people from history who would have relished a visit to the seaside, much as we do today, splashing in shifts and undergarments and dancing in the salty waves to cool down aching feet. Indeed, a little research after my last visit had revealed the beach's pioneering history. It was used as the starting point for two important flights, the first being that of Australian aviator Charles Kingsford Smith on the 23rd of June 1930, when his plane, the Southern Cross, became the first to circumnavigate the globe by a route that crossed both hemispheres. Starting from the 3-mile stretch of Portmarnock's velvet strand, he had flown transatlantic to Newfoundland and then onwards to California. 2 years later, Jim Mollison, a British pilot, performed the first solo westbound transatlantic flight from Portmarnock to New Brunswick. Feeling I had walked far enough, I stopped and breathed in the scene again. The clean and cool seafoam air filled my lungs and brought waves of satisfied rest to my physical form once more. I inhaled and exhaled the sea and the sky and the sand and the soft and distant strains of laughter and birdsong. My body had forgotten what it was like to stretch, to release, to relax. The heavy earth beneath me was so inviting to my tired muscles that I lay down right there upon the warm sand, just to let my body give in completely. As the last of the tension washed clean from my surrendering form, I felt my limbs extend out, cat-like, and I rolled onto my side, as if to pull the blanket of warmth up around myself. I lazily watched a flock of seagulls creating waves in the sky as they danced to and fro in great formations across the landscape. I counted 3 different types of terns, tottering and bobbing around the smooth and glimmering feasting ground that was the mudflats, searching for the morsels therein. Common terns and Arctic terns were the most usual types to be seen here, but visits were occasionally made by roseate, sandwich, and black varieties too. There was something so soothing about them going about their business, like small white dots in the mid-distance, blurred from view by the radiant backdrop of the setting sun. Blues and golds diffused almost imperceptibly into deep oranges and pinks, and I felt the need to move now. Somehow, though, I wanted to go onwards. I had been transported to a magical time and space by the still glow of the strand, and I wasn't ready to go back to reality. Not just yet. Rising slowly to my feet, I knew I needed more. I needed to go deeper into the magic place, deeper into the release, deeper into myself. It had been too long since I'd checked in, and at the same time, too long since I'd checked out. I knew now that this beach on the edge of town was only the gateway, the portal through which my busy mind could pass and begin to safely leave all busyness down for a while. And so I made my way back to the road. As I'd hoped, I was just on time for the bus that would take me to Talbot Street and onwards to Connolly Station. A short trip later, I had reached my first destination, and a short stroll brought me to Amiens Street, named after John Stratford, 1st Earl of Aldebra, who was called Viscount Amiens after the French town of Amiens. Up ahead, the Italianate facade of Dublin Connolly was like the warm and welcoming face of an old friend. Inside, there was no queue for the ticket booth, and an equally low demand for the journey, and I found myself on an empty platform, anticipating the familiar old road ahead, the road to peace. Making my way down into the gently populated station had felt like submerging myself in the cool, dark belly of the earth. I felt held and safe as I waited, held by the knowledge that this train, just now pulling up and opening its doors to me, would emerge from beneath the ground in a matter of minutes on the northern side of the city and show me a movie reel of the route back to that wonderful place. Hawthorn, gorse, and fern whizzed past, punctuated by small groups of tall red brick chimneys and the occasional strip of quaint residential gardens which backed out onto the railway. Every now and then were flashes of the field beyond, rich with bright yellow rapeseed and streaming waves of golden wheat. The scent of sunshine still lingered on my skin and transported me endlessly to the beach, the one I had just left, the one I would see soon. An hour of the carriage's pulsing lull had subdued my mind into complete submission by the time I disembarked at Dundalk. Clark Station always felt like stepping back in time, with only one quaint platform perched beneath the polished and intricate Victorian covered walkway which made the station so unique, and from which I now emerged before hailing a car to bring me onwards to Carlingford. Thankfully, the driver seemed to be feeling as serene as I was, and few words passed between us as we winged our way beneath the soft indigo sky toward the seaside village. I knew that a luxuriously comfortable bed awaited me there, and I hoped I'd be able to hold out just enough energy to soak the place up a bit before retiring to it for the soundest night's sleep I'd have had in quite some time. The old stone bridge we crossed now used to act as an arterial road out of town, but at this hour seemed deserted but for my driver and his passenger. As we traversed it, I felt that reassuring feeling that some people get when they are homeward bound. But my destination tonight was better than home. It was free of all obligations. It was a place to feel only peace and pleasure, and occasional inspiration. We passed what felt like the last human outpost on our journey, as empty car parks and bicycle lanes yielded to trees and hedgerows. After a short while, even the hedges had succumbed to the wide openness of the coastal road. Between our gliding car and the sea beyond lay only marshy embankments and reed-filled shallows. The moon, although hiding low behind a silvery cloud bank, lit up just enough of the landscape that I could make out the subtle definition of the layered rock that marked the beginning of the Cooley Mountains. 3 sleepy townlands later, the car rounded the first smooth bend that indicated I was almost there. Moving soundlessly past Carlingford's ancient town gate, or tholsel, I recalled all of the hidden historical gems within the village's boundary walls. The town mint, which stands only a few doors down Tholsel Street and is constructed mostly of limestone, has 5 intricately carved windows from the 16th century, which reveal a revival in Celtic art during that period. Following the old boundary, on past the former church turned heritage centre and lavender-adorned cottages, I could see the huge arch-shaped silhouette of the abbey ruins up ahead. It had been founded by Dominicans in 1305 and was still in surprisingly pristine condition, considering it had been used as a handball alley in the 1500s. I wondered if the stonemasons who had built the mint and created those beautiful window carvings had ever visited for a leisurely game. Beyond the abbey, I felt the car creep slowly up the gentle slope of the village's mountain roads. Carlingford lies nestled at the heart of the coulees, which act like a protective spine of granite for the picturesque little settlements within its folds. Sometimes the mountains, which have eroded to mere hills by a cartographer's reckoning, can draw deep swells of rain and cloud and crackling electrical storms from the flat plains around them and the wide coastal loch that they encompass. There is a strange weather phenomenon which occurs there frequently when conditions are just so. The wind streams down along the steep east-facing slope of Slieve Foy, and, upon passing by the 12th century cliffside ruin of King John's Castle, touches down upon the briny water of the loch. Wind and water then entwine, as it carries some of the salt water along with it and begins to dance around the surface of the loch like a magnificent ballerina. This occurrence is known as the Carlingford Kettle. Tonight, however, the loch was utterly still. Even the reflections of the twinkling lamps on the pier were unmoving in the water. From up here, I could make out almost its full breadth. it was easy to see how one early 20th century author could feel inspired to write tales of a golden city that once stood where the loch does now, transposing an Irish deity named Green, or Sun, onto tales of the Roman sun god Helios. Michael George Crawford described a legendary ancient settlement which stood at the foot of the volcanic Slieve Foy and was full of priestesses and adoring fire worshippers. To him, the loch held all the secrets of an Atlantean dynasty. As our car climbed higher into the night, the brooding silhouette of the mountain before us was like a blanket being held open wide in anticipation of an embrace. Once we had arrived at the last hamlet before the silent darkness of the fern-covered mountain top, I was lovingly placed at the entrance to the long winding pathway that led to my resting place for the night. The soft hum of the retreating car engine was the only sound to be heard. Above, the stars formed a breathtaking backdrop for the intricate latticework of tree branches overhead. Their knitted patterns closed in just ahead of me to form a protective canopy over my little laneway. I began to walk it slowly now, allowing the nighttime air to enfold me and soothe me with each careful step. The fields were empty of their grazing occupants tonight. Through gaps in the hedgerow, I could see that the inhabitants of the last few houses before mine had settled into their living rooms or their beds for the night. Their sparse lamplight glowed gently from within their homes. Again, I found myself imagining this place 100 years ago, when mine was the only house in this spot where the hamlet now stood. The modest Georgian house must have seemed quite grand to the tenants and servants who would have frequented it from their nearby cottages, although it was dwarfed in size by some of its contemporaries in the village below. But for this purpose, the purpose of retreating, recharging, it was perfect. I found the key beneath the well-worn mat outside the arch-framed front door. I felt the slightest shiver as I stepped into the tiled reception hall, but quickly discovered that the fire in the master room had been left set and ready for an arrival. Within moments it was lit and casting long shadows over the plush and gilded wingback reading chair and the thick piled carpet before it. A stack of dried logs huddled in the nook beside the chimney breast, waiting their turn to lavish heat upon the room and its inhabitants. The best part was yet to come, though. I began by turning on the faucet of the high-backed copper bathtub in the next room. It stood before an expansive window, which looked out over the dramatic barren landscape of the saddle of the mountain. With candles lit and the sacred aroma of frankincense burning in its censer, I eventually slipped into the healing waters and felt myself sink to the bottom. I surrendered completely now to their commanding heat and watched a shooting star make its way across the navy blue sky beyond. My calves reminded my knees and my thighs to unravel, and my hips shifted to accommodate them. A ball in the pit of my stomach, of which I hadn't even been aware, seemed to dissolve all at once, as I felt the healing vapors fill my lungs and my head, leaving my chest and shoulders free to descend and settle into the warm gleaming copper which held them so securely from behind. And yes, even those pebbles which had been occupying my neck and temples were trickling right out of existence. I bent my knees just a little, allowing the waters to climb up to the nape of my neck, like two loving hands working out each crease and knot they could find. After a while, the heat of the bath seemed much gentler, and the warm promise of sleep crept upon me. The thick cotton towel was calling me from its nearby heating rack, and so I decided I could soak up no more of Carlingford for tonight, and neither could my tired muscles. On entering the bedroom, my bare feet sank deep into the carpet, and within moments the rest of my body sank deep into the large feather-blanketed bed. The fire crackled gently across the room, keeping an ambient vigil for this weary nighttime traveller. The old grandfather clock in the reception hall ticked softly and steadily throughout the house, keeping watch more than keeping time, since time seemed not to exist in this place outside of civilization. I fancied I could hear the waves of the turning tide at the foot of the mountain below, but perhaps those were the waves of peace, descending down now in the complete absence of noise. I felt the thick, soft pillows accept my weight gratefully as I shifted slightly into that shape that is just right for sleep. And it came upon me all at once, gracefully but certainly, the need I had pursued when I left the world behind me without once